So the electronic vendor portal is just always worth repeating. It's where vendors and contractors register to do business with the state of North Carolina. It's a consolidation of the IPS and e-procurement system. And it's IPS, I think they dropped that acronym now. I don't think I think it's just all EVP. But the big takeaway from these slides is contractors must be registered in EVP or IPS to be in the Interscope system. It sends free email notifications for bidding opportunities, and it's where state agencies, community colleges, universities, public schools, and some local governments, such as counties and municipalities, advertise for their solicitations. Again, big takeaway is contractors must be registered in EVP to be entered into the Interscope system. It's their contact information and the hub office and Interscope's contact information. I'll say it one more time. Big takeaway, contractors must be registered in the EVP system to be listed in the Interscope system. So Interscope is an acronym, is the Internet State Construction Office Project Environment. It was created in 1999 for the State Construction Office to internally track capital projects they had oversight on. In 2012, there was a decision made to create a statewide capital project system that would be used by the community college system, universities, and all state agencies. That was implemented in the summer of 2015. So there was a lot of development that had to happen there. Interscope Plus today is a combination of Interscope, CapStat, the HubSco system. We have Bluebeam that's integrated into that, as well as the state property office, where we can look at the asset numbers. It tracks the life cycle of a capital project from the authorization until it's closed out. In the interim, it's tracking funding sources, it tracks the hub data, we can upload design review drawings, and we can link it to assets and inspections. It's not intended to be an accounting system, but it does have contracts, budgets, hub information, and optional detailed expenditure tracking, but it's not linked to the North Carolina financial system. Hard for me to say the NCFS because I've said INCAST for so many years. So let's talk about what Interscope can do. It provides a single capital projects management system for state construction, universities, community colleges, state agencies, and it provides MBE or hub data integration. It tracks funding sources and budgets, it tracks commitments, and it reduces conflicting data, and which provides more consistent reporting, and it replaces the HubSco system for capital project hub data reporting. It no longer integrates the Primavera P6. That was a product that the university system used, but it does allow electronic plan review and upload of those plan documents. It collects designer hub data. Those are not mandatory fields, but if a designer is a hub or a consultant is a hub, it will capture that data. It allows for multiple project delivery methods, and it allows for project owner inspection requests on smaller projects that don't require a full SCOID number or a full project. And it does link the state property office assets to projects. And so you have to link it yourself. It won't do it automatically, but that feature is there. So how a typical capital project flows through the system is we have an authorization, and the authorizations at the university and community college level, or those systems, are done at the system office level for universities and community colleges. The campuses can create projects for universities once they're there, but community college system office creates the projects as well. So we have an authorization that allocates funds to a program. And a program is like a bucket, and you can put multiple assignments of authorization into a program and then fund those projects. So programs fund projects, and then from the project level, funds are committed to design contracts and construction contracts. And I'm going to pause right here. I've got something in the chat box. Are the slides not changing for everybody? I've got some. So am I just talking
They're
and
no, they're changing for me.
okay.
Yep, they're changing for me.
Okay, great. Hey, Miriam, thank you for being here. I'm glad you could make it this morning.
Thank you.
So an authorization, a different way of looking at how this information is nested. So you have an authorization, that authorization funds a program. The program funds a project, the project funds a design contract, and then the system automatically creates a package when there's a design contract. And then that's where your construction contracts reside. So the system works on ribbons and tabs. So at the top ribbon, you'll see the authorization tab, and then you'll see tabs below that for program, and it's nested project, design, package, construction contract. It's thinking of it as a nested file foldering system. So the Interscope SEO ID number, it's gradually created. The first two digits are the project year. That's the calendar year the project was created, not necessarily funded. The second set of numbers is the project sequence number, and the system assigns that number a unique number for each project. The third set of numbers is your design contract number. Projects can have multiple design contracts. If you have a larger project that has commissioning and then a fully funded, or if there's advanced planning, then you could have multiple design contract numbers. The letter is the package ID, which is the process container for design and construction. That's where all of the work and the reviews and inspections are going to happen. So you are probably accustomed to seeing a SEO ID number, that format that you see on the screen. And everything below that is what I just explained. Sure to include the full SEO ID number on all documents. For example, submittals, plans, correspondence, any documents that you send in by paper to our office or through electronic format, if you would please include that full SEO ID number. If they're submitting electronic plans, and I don't think I have any designers on this morning, and this would really more apply to them, please follow the naming convention guidelines in section 512 of the construction manual. It's simple enough. If you're in that package and you're under the plans review tab and you're going, okay, let me upload this plan review, and these are construction documents. So I'm just going to say project name construction documents because that's how you have it formatted on your desktop because that's your project. That's how you're tracking it. But if you upload it that way into Interscope, Interscope doesn't have an SEO ID number to link that to because if you just upload it into the system, it's like, okay, well, where do I go with this? So you always want to be sure that you put that SEO ID number in anything that you're uploading. So it's sure that it pulls it to the right tab and the right location in the system. So there are multiple logon types in Interscope, and this is the landing page or the logon page for Interscope. And under the logon tab, you'll see 4 blue links. And there's a link for agencies, and a link for universities, a link for community colleges, and a link for designer and contractor logons. So when you have a logon in Interscope, it's giving you a slivered view, if you will. So if you're an agency, and let's say you're with DIT, when you log in with your DIT logon, you're only going to see DIT projects. Same thing for the university. If you're at Central, when you log in, you're only going to see Central's projects, not all the university projects. So it does that just for several reasons. One is for security, and the other is it just would be overwhelming information to have everybody's information available. There's also a self-service forget password or user ID, and you can click on that and give it some information, and it will email you back the correct information of what your logon is. Any questions so far? Okay, so we'll move on to the next section here. So project types, it's a designation based on the agency, institution, dollar amount of the project, the funding type, and other factors that determine what oversight roles state construction will exercise, such as managing the design and construction contracts, reviews, etc. There are different project types based on the department, agency, authorization, and dollar amount of the project. So when you're creating projects and you're entering them into Interscope, you want to be careful to always use the total project cost, not what you have funding for or what phase you're working on now or what funding you'll get next year, but you want to put the holistic view of the entire project in. That way, the project oversight is correct and all the roles are set up properly. It's kind of hard to go back retroactively and change that mid-project because it could change up a lot of things and it could change what the review should be. And I don't know about anybody else, but I don't know anybody that's got extra time built in their projects. So let's be sure that we pick carefully when we pick a project type. So for information hierarchy of how the system flows, we have authorizations that fund programs. So for community colleges, they have what we call a one-to-one relationship. So typically in community colleges, you will see one authorization funding one program, funding one project. In the university system and state agencies, you will sometimes see a one-to-many relationship where one authorization can fund multiple programs, and in turn, that program can fund multiple projects. So that's just how the information flows through the system. And here's a variation of that, and it pretty much says what I just said, but in a slide. So there are 8 different funding sources within the Interscope system. We have the general fund, which is appropriated funds, non-general fund, which is receipts, grants, gifts, cash, county appropriated funds, etc. Then there's state debt, which is state bonds, COPS, or special indebtedness. And the non-state debt, which is debt issued by the institutions, county, or other entity other than the state of North Carolina. There's R&R funding from R&R appropriations. Then there's R&R debt that can come from state debt, such as special indebtedness or COPS. And then SCIF General Fund, which is the State Capital Infrastructure Funds, appropriated funds. And then we have SCIF State Debt, which we've not used any of that, but there was an anticipation that we could use it in several fiscal years from now. So we went ahead and put that in the system so it's ready, but that's funds from state debt. So I think a lot of people are spending some SCIF money right now. There's several different project types in the system. You want to be mindful when you select that project type. A lot of these are a point of no return. Once we select that project type, we can't go back and unselect it or change how the project's going to flow through the system. So when you create a project in Interscope, by default, the system will select standard project for you. This will apply to most capital projects, but if it's anything other than a standard project, you're going to have to click that radio button and toggle to a different project type. So we have performance contracts, which applies to guaranteed energy savings performance contracts. We have foundation projects, which when they first came into the system, they were just foundation projects. They were primarily for the UNC system, and they're designed and constructed by Foundation, but must be reviewed by SEO. We have since changed that label to read Foundation/other projects because they're being used outside of the UNC system.
Leanne, if I can add there that this does not mean that a foundation is just paying for a project, because that funding source can be used and still be a normal university project. To be a foundation project, it has to be not just funded by a university foundation, but contracted by the university foundation. So they are handling the design contract, the construction contract, and managing the project. It's not just an issue of it being funded from a foundation source.
And I'll piggyback off of that. And typically with foundation other projects, state construction's role is design review or code review only. It's just code only review. So keep that in mind that typically state construction has very little oversight in those outside of the code review piece. So the next one is design build project. They're projects that do not have a separate design and construction contract, and they are kind of designed and built at the same time. Let's see, I have a question in the chat box about design review. Can informal projects be design build, or is that for formal only?
I'll take that one, Leanne, if you'd
Thank
like.
you, Miriam. I would. Thank you.
Design build has a requirement that you justify the process, and you have to complete that justification looking at the statutory items that say this is a good fit. So I can answer it by saying technically there is no prohibition on using design build for an informal project, but practically the effort that you have to go through to justify it, and remember, design build is a qualifications-based selection process. So you have an RFP that has to be issued in a much larger process that practically you just don't use design build for informal, because the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You're having to justify it and go through a more elaborate solicitation process, when the idea behind informals is to do it informally and quickly. So it's just not a practical application for design build on informal projects.
Thank you for that, Miriam. The non-code item project types are projects, wow, that do not go through the normal state authorization process, such as county-funded projects at community colleges or projects completed with operating funds. This will also be used for reporting small project hub information. It may have code review. An estimated project completion date, funding source, and fiscal year funded must be entered. These fields appear for entry only when non-code item type is selected. So like an electrical project, it's a smaller project, but it must have review and inspection. So you could use that non-code item.
And again, for the university system folks, that non-code item project should be under $100,000. Once you hit $100,000, you should be getting some type of capital authority. And so it would be a code and item project in that case.
All right, thank you for that, Miriam. And then the hub only or small non-code item projects that do not require a design contract, package, or code review. So an example of that would be painting. And there's a hub decision tree. And we walked through that last time, and I'm just going to put it up for review for you to take a look at. So these are kind of a flow of how you can ask questions if it falls into that category or not. And I'm going to update this slide with the $100,000 piece for the universities as well. Okay. Hub-only projects are inherently non-code item projects. There are no fund assignments or financial controls. Hub-only projects do not have a design contract or an Interscope package. And hub-only construction contracts may not exceed $300,000, but we're going to change that to $100,000. Is that right, Miriam?
Yes.
Okay. Projects don't have an authorization. They do have a program and a project, but there are no funds allocated or assigned. And the system office is going to create by fiscal year a program that's called whatever the fiscal year is and non-code item program. So you can drop all of your projects underneath that particular program that fall into that non-code item category. So there's no design contract for hub only, no Interscope package, but there is a construction contract with hub data to capture. So the hub office asks that if you're not to stack the deck and only enter your small projects that have hub participation, that you would enter all of your small projects regardless of hub participation. That way the percentages come out correctly as to what your overall level of hub participation was. So hub-only projects inside of Interscope are going to look a little abbreviated because you don't have all of the extra tabs for design and packages. Questions?
If we needed an electrical inspection for like new receptacles dropped in a classroom, how would we enter that into Interscope? Because we would need an inspection from, I think, Jesse.
Right. So if the new receptacles that you're adding to your classrooms doesn't change the load, there's no ballast change outs, it's just an addition, then you can go into Interscope and use that feature that I showed in the last training session last week of how to request an inspection. And then you can just request it on the asset number. And there is, under the help tab in Interscope, a step-by-step walkthrough of how to do that. But if it does require load change or the ballast has to be changed out or any of that, then you're going to have some design review or some code review done to make sure that it's still in compliance and it's not dangerous, right? And so you would have to create that non-code item project if it falls under that $100,000 category and create a project.
When in doubt about whether a project needs state construction office review or not, of course, always ask, and you can file a request for an exemption for review. And if you have an approved exemption, then again, you would use that inspection only request that Leanne's talking about. But as long as it is having review, you will have a review number that you can use to make that request against.
Okay, got you.
That was a good question. Thank you. Okay, so any questions?
Oh, yeah, I got one question. Painting was mentioned in regards to, hub review. Is there a dollar limit, like for painting projects, that you would have to do it as a project?
So yes, anything over $30,000 is considered a project, and you would need to have a project ID number. Okay, and it would need to go through the system. So I know sometimes it seems kind of easy. Okay, well, I can just get that through purchasing contract and get this carpet, and our facilities folks can just install it, or we can get paint. But if you hit that dollar threshold of 30,000, then it actually becomes a capital project.
I would supplement that a little bit, Leanne, because there is a bit of a gray area on some of these. For example, carpet replacement could be purchased under state contract. And then it would not necessarily fall on the capital side. And similarly, there could be a contractual service that is solicited through an RFP on the procurement side and paid for maybe from housing receipts, so that it's not actually classified as a capital project that would go through Interscope. So where those have gone through procurement also reports hub. So if it is handles the purchase, it gets reported as hub on the purchasing side. Don't put it into Interscope for reporting if it is going through purchasing, because then you would be double counting the hub participation. So I know that puts many of our project managers in kind of a spot of, which side of the fence does this fall on? But just please be mindful of that. If it's not a capital project that has capital authority in Interscope, and it has been done through procurement, it needs to be reported on the procurement side, not on the Interscope side.
That is a very good point. Thank you for that, Miriam. Okay. Those are really good questions. Do we have any more questions before we move into the next section? Because we've got Miriam, and she's an expert, so she always has the answers or can find them. So let's use that while we've got her. Amy, did you have something? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're perfectly fine. Just want to clarify, if it is something procured through state contract, but it is state funds and it's in Interscope, the project is in Interscope and it's state funded, we do put that in Interscope, correct?
If it's a capital project and it's part of the capital project, it should be reported in Interscope, but if it's gone through procurement, so let me give you an example. You are building a new building and you've got a contract with a contractor to do the construction of that building. But as part of your strategy for executing that project, you pulled the carpet out and are purchasing it under state contract and are going to have it purchased and installed under a state contract vendor. That has separated that piece from the capital project that's under the direction of the contractor. So again, it's going to go through procurement. It should be reported through procurement. However, you will need to at least record the expenditure and the expenditures location in Interscope so that you are accounting for that capital money that is associated with the project, even though it's been pulled out. Another item that's sometimes pulled out is blinds. You know, you may order the blinds and have them purchased through a state blind contract instead of having them as part of the contractors. So it gets a little bit blurry. And if you are in a situation, you have a question, we're certainly happy to put our heads together and noodle through it to figure out what the right thing to do is.
Thank you, Miriam. Those were just the examples that I was inquiring about. Thank you.
Good.
Yes. And that additional expenditures that Miriam was talking about, we find that under that financial worksheet for expenditures other. So that's where you can record that data. And it does have a little block out to the side that says hub, and you can check it if you want to, but it's not going to record that hub data from that location with the anticipation that it's going to be reported on that P&C side. Give it a second and see if we have any additional questions.
I got a question. I heard it's like, what is the difference? Like it was I know about the 2 million, but on 4 million, is that kicks in anything special on projects when it's over $4 million or $4 million?
That's a good question, William. And Miriam, feel free to chime in if I'm missing something. But so that threshold is different for state agencies and community colleges and universities. For state agencies, anything over $500,000 is going to come to our office, which is state construction. Community colleges, they have a threshold of projects up to 2 million, with 4 colleges that have special delegation up to 4 million. So that means projects up to that $2 million mark, they can take care of those in-house, or they have the oversight on those projects. So for universities, that $4 million, it's just moved up. So anything under 4 million, that college or that campus has oversight on it. And if it's over 4 million, then those projects are coming to the state construction office for oversight. And Miriam, feel free to add into that.
You're exactly right, Leanne. The $4 million is where full state construction oversight comes into play for the universities, where you have a monitor assigned and they are fully engaged in negotiating your design contract, awarding your construction contract, and then going with you through the rest of the process. It's a full oversight state construction office project. Below that 4 million threshold for the universities, state construction still is our code official, so they are still reviewing the plans and approving them as to compliance with the code, and they will do inspections, but they are not assigning a monitor and overseeing the construction project and awarding the contract. Those below 4 million, the awarding authority is the UNC System Office. So $4 million is that break point where it directs the process to full SCO oversight or administration by the system office and the institution.
Thank you for that clarification, Miriam. And we are working on scheduling a CPC training, a capital project coordinator training. It's looking like it's going to be in June. I say that to tell you that what we're talking about right now will take a deeper dive into those oversights and what that looks like and who does what and those moving parts in that CPC training. But
I'll
happy to
also-
answer those questions now.
I also note that we have a guidance document on the UNC system website that is color coded at different stages. It's got a section that identifies the authorization that you have to have at different levels, and then the processes that apply at different levels. So if you're one of the university folks in this class, I encourage you to look at that chart and maybe print it out. And if you're a project manager, put it there at your desk, because it's a pretty succinct roadmap on the steps that you have to go through at different levels.
And for the community college folks, I'm pretty sure that on the capital projects page of the community college system office website, they have a similar guiding document that will guide you through for the community college levels. And the agency folks, you're stuck with us. So we I think there may be some information in well, I'm sure it is in the construction manual. But if you have specific questions, feel free to always reach out to our office and ask, and we'll guide you through best we can. Any other questions before we move into authorizations and transfers? And Miriam just put that link to the university website in the chat box for any of you that would like to have it. Okay, so I'm going to move into authorizations. Share that screen. Okay, if you'll give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen change. Okay, great. So we're going to move into the authorizations. So keep in mind that authorizations for universities and community colleges are done at the system office level. But I do have a couple of agency folks on, so I want to walk through this and let them see the process. And we actually did this in our Interscope introduction training. And this particular document that you're looking at, you can find it under the Help tab in Interscope under User Training, and it's called, I think it's, it maybe just says authorizations or entering authorizations. Started at the end. So we talked about earlier a typical capital project and how it flows. So we have an authorization. It starts with an authorization unless it's a non-code item or hub-only project. We have to have money to create a project, right? So the authorization is going to fund a program, and then the program is going to fund the project, then the design contract, and then your construction contract. We just covered all that, so I'm not going to talk about that again. So an authorization will typically be entered by a senior level person within a state agency or department, or by the system office for community colleges or the UNC system office for universities. And your user profile, based on your logon information, should autofill that department. And you also have to have user permissions to get into this to be able to do it. So if you're not authorized or you don't have permissions, or you're not in that role, you shouldn't be able to access the authorizations to add a new authorization. And it'll bring up the search screen for an authorization. So you can search or you can add a new authorization. And university folks, you should not have an add new authorization unless you work in the system office. Same thing for community college. You should not have that feature unless you work in the system office. You would fill in the appropriate information, or the required fields are marked with asterisks or have a red border. And it's a budget or an NCFS center number is required. Taking a note. I'm seeing this is pretty new, so I haven't updated this presentation.
Now, of course, we're using that same field to put the reference budget fund number in, which is the new terminology.
Yes, the new terminology. And that is in QA and should be in our live system, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So I'm kind of excited about that with the additional field size, Miriam. So You can get both in there if you want to. So once you put that information in, it's going to show a status of allocation in progress because you haven't allocated it to a program yet. And this won't change until all funds are allocated to programs. But you would enter the budget and the NCFS number. Once saved, the authorization detail tab shows up on the lower part of the screen. There's also a system assigned authorization number. Then you would select the authorization item detail tab and enter the amount of the authorization in the proper fund source when all funds have been entered. So you'll see that populate here. So once you action save, it gives you some more tabs and you would go to this authorization detail item. So this actually is an old slide too, because it doesn't have this is where we talked about those different fund sources. This is where it's determined based on the authorization received of where the funding is coming from. This information will flow all the way down through the project. And then you'll need to create a program to allocate the funds before the authorization will become active for use. And here there's a link creating a program presentation. And we won't go into that because I don't think anybody, maybe William might be the one that would create a program, but I think we've already done a one-on-one training with that. William, do you need me to show you how to create a program? Or are you good?
I'm good.
Great. I knew you were quick, William. Any questions about that? That kind of university folks and community college folks, you could just put your fingers in your ears. You have a question in the chat box. If it's under 100,000 and agency funds, would the legislative authorization be checked? So if it's agency funds, it would be non-general fund if it's not coming from the legislature. Did that answer your question, Tony? So funds change requests allow moving funds from an authorization or program to another authorization or program. It begins with entering a request and continues with a sequential multi-step approval process. A separate request must be created for each source of funds to be transferred. The program that the funds will be transferred from must have unassigned funds equal to or greater than the amount to be transferred within the source of funds. The program must have $15,000 in unassigned non-general funds in order to be able to transfer $15,000 in non-general fund. Excess funds and projects may be unassigned to increase the amount of unassigned funds within a program. So you could have the money there, but it could be at the program level. And if it's at the program level or at the project level. So if you have a project with excess money and you want to move it to another project or another program, you got to move that money back up, give it back to the program so it's available to move. At the top of your homepage, you'll find Funds Change Request and then Funds Change Request. Click on that link underneath it to bring up the Funds Transfer search screen. And once you get to that search screen, you can search for a previous request that has been made to check the status or create a new request. A new request may be either a transfer of existing funds from one program to another or to increase in authority. Increase or decrease in authority applies generally to non-general fund, or non-state debt funding sources where the agency or institution is providing the funds or releasing unneeded funds, but both follow a similar approval process. So for the funds transfer, you would select a new funds transfer button, and that would show up under that screen. And then you would search for the program that you want to transfer the funds from and select the desired program. And then you would enter in the search criteria and search for the program that you want to transfer the funds from and select the desired program. So you can see here that I'm in the Department of Administration and under state construction and the fiscal year. So it's going to only bring up those programs that fit that criteria. You would enter the amount you wish to transfer. If there are multiple fund sources in the program, be sure to select the correct or the desired fund source. So you can see this one has two different fund sources. It's got fund source NGF, non-general fund, but they're different code and item numbers. So that's why you have two different entries. And then you would search for the selected program to which you want to transfer the money into. And it's only going to let you transfer it within the same department and the same institution. Enter appropriate remarks as to why you're transferring the funds and click the Save button. So you always want to give a reason why you're doing it. This brings up the summary of the request, and you'll see the workflow button show up on the right here. So you can see that it's showing in a created status, and then there's the workflow. Send the request forward for approval. You want to hover over the workflow and click Submit. So normally the requester will not be approving the request for the agency or institution, but an email will be sent to the approver notifying him or her that there's a request for their action.
Leanne, this is Miriam. I'd like to make one comment here about these funds change requests. We issued some guidance last fall about how these requests are processed, basically who does what kind of requests when, because, for example, when the Board of Governors takes an action at their regularly scheduled meetings, we initiate the establishment if it's a new project, or an increase, for example, if you have requested an increase in authority. So again, would encourage you to make sure you have access to that information. It was distributed to the assistant vice chancellors for facilities, and then I also circulated it to directors and contacts that I knew were addressing funds transfers. So if you need that guidance, please just email me. I'll put my email in the chat box, and I can get that guidance information to you, so you know when it's your responsibility to initiate these kinds of changes versus when it's our responsibility in the system office to start this process.
Thank you for that, Miriam. So here, the next person who is the next level up in the approval process will open the transaction and make a decision to accept or reject the request by selecting the appropriate button under the workflow. They may make comments in the space provided at the bottom of the workflow, and an explanation in the comments is mandatory if it's rejected. If that person disapproves the request, the original requester is notified and the process is complete. If that person approves the request, the system notifies the next higher level approver. The third level person must log in and navigate to the pending request. So with some of the, I have some smaller agencies that don't always have those multiple level people, so they have to get somebody from their budget office, because what the system's not going to let you do is be the person to create, submit, and approve at the agency level. So you can create and submit can be one person, and then approve at the agency level has to be a second person or a second log on. And then in this particular case, that's like agency level, and then at the department level for that has to be a third approver. So really for a university or community college, there would have to be two people at the campus level, and then one person at the department level, which would be your system office. And I have a question in the chat box. And it says, I need to do this if I am canceling a project, or just cancel and do an amendment to another project to move the funds. So if you were canceling a project, you would just unassign that money back to the program level, and then you could cancel the project. And that's providing that there haven't been any reviews, or, well, you're not talking about deleting it. So then you could just cancel it, but you would just unassign the money from the project level to the program level. And also in the chat box, Miriam has given her email address if you wanted to request guidance or the document that was circulated last fall for universities and the funds change request responsibilities. So check the chat box.
And also elaborate on the answer you just gave as it may relate to university projects. If it's a university project, certainly you can liquidate, cancel the project. If the entire, not just the project, but the intent of the authorization is going to be changed, we would need to have some interaction with you as a user because it might entail needing to come back to the board to have them authorize a change. We can't just move funds from one authority to another. We have to make sure that the authorization for the scope and budget is kind of maintained, and if it is changed, that we have the right permission to do so. So it might be a little more complex response to that question depending on the circumstances.
Definitely. So, yeah. So if you're canceling a project, I don't think you can just cancel it. You're going to have to talk to somebody about it, regardless of what agency or community college you're with. And I answered that question with the assumption that you'd already done that. But Miriam makes a really good point. You just can't do it. So, all right. So the next slide is the status for request remains in a pending status until disapproved or until the top level of the approval process approves it. So it works like any other workflow. It's got to go through the workflow and approval. Once it receives final approval, the funds records will be updated and there will be no longer the funds in a pending status. But while funds are in a pending status, they may not be assigned, committed, or otherwise affected. So it's kind of like same thing with your bank account. When you have a pending charge, it's pulled that money out of your balance and it's just sitting out there waiting for the vendor or merchant to pull the money out. But you can't spend it and nobody else can spend it. So this works the same way. Any questions about the funds change request? And not everybody will ever do this. So, William, did you have something?
Yeah, because I had another I guess teacher, Bob Talley, was telling me when you're setting up your project and you set up the program, he was saying like keep the name kind of generic. So when you do get into a situation like this and transferring funds, it's not coming from specifically named in the program, but something general. So when you get into your project name, you can be more exact, but he was giving me that hint that makes it a little bit easier when you're transferring funds.
I would agree with that with a yes and no. If it's like R&R funding and it's okay, or it's specific to, let's say, roof repairs for the downtown complex. So you could keep that generic as R&R roof repairs because you know that you could use that money on any building in the downtown complex. But if the authorization is pretty specific in scope, like a lot of the SCIF monies are pretty specific to a project on a specific building or a specific campus, then because that's legislatively mandated, you're okay to be specific in that title. Does that clear the mud up for you?
And I would reinforce, Leanne, you used the word SCIF. That's very important in the university system. If there is even a minor R&R project, it is identified for specific activities. So for example, if we have roof repair, we have roof repair for a specific building, and it can't just be transferred without, again, permission. There's a high degree of accountability associated with all of the SCIF projects because, as Leanne said, for ours, they were listed in the statute. So we can't just transfer money between projects without going through another step and getting the appropriate permission.
Exactly. So, and William, some of our monies are the same way. So I would be mindful of that as to what the authorization states that it is. Because if that money needs to be boxed in, then keep it boxed in.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's move into increases and decreases. So to do that, you would hover over the Funds Change Request tab and then click on the Funds Change Request, which was just like the previous one that we did. But now we want to click on the new Increase Decrease button. So keep in mind that you can only increase or decrease existing authority. So it has to be in the system for you to increase it or decrease it. If it's new authority, then it would be a new authorization. So you would search for an existing authorization that you wish to increase or decrease. So you would find that here and do the search. You would bring up the summary of the request and you would select the action button and save, and then you'll see the workflow with the current status. So then you would select the workflow and submit it to send the request forward for approval. But you would put the amount in. I think I missed that slide in the previous one, but it's going to give you your institution and then what you're requesting the increase to be. And then it's going to open up that workflow that's going to work the same as the previous workflow. And it goes through the same until it's approved or rejected. So that one's pretty simple. Thank you, Miriam, for being on, and I appreciate your time this morning. Miriam's got to jump off for another meeting. Any questions about the increase or decrease? That's pretty straightforward and simple. You just put the amount in and then action save and start the workflow, and it's going to work just like the request, the other funds change request. Any questions about the funds change request or increase or decrease? Okay, so
if we've got a current authorization and we've received additional R&R SCIF funds, and that authorization, we'd have to use the change request to then increase a current authorization.
You're not requesting it, it's already been given to you.
I'm saying if we had,
if you had one,
we've got a roofing project at our Eastern Data Center, and we had an authorization for it, but it turned out the funds wasn't sufficient. We had to go back to the well, so to speak, and we got additional funds from OSBM with a new code and everything, and we just added that to the authorization. Should we've done the increase request?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of people, I think, forget that we have that option, but this gives the ability to track that increase and why you're, let's say it was 100,000 and you need 110,000. So you would typically go in and do that increase request, just like what we walked through, and then it would increase it by the 10,000 once OSBM approved it.
Okay.
But sometimes I think people forget that we have that option and they just go to OSBM and they're like, oh yeah, here's the extra 10,000. So if that's the case and you have the documentation to back it up, you can go back to the original authorization and just increase that amount. Like you were entering a new authorization, you would just update the amount.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, that's done by permission too. You have those permissions to do that in the system.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, William. All right, so change orders are specifically for construction contracts. If there are changes to a design contract, that's called an amendment. So that doesn't have a workflow, but sometimes change orders do. So let's take a look at those. So there are project types and approval levels. I probably need to update this screen too, since we've got an increase in authority on universities. Making notes as we go here. So for formal projects, a construction change order process provides an electronic process for submitting and approving change orders with construction cost over $500,000, and it's controlled by a workflow that requires the sequential execution of the steps by the respective parties. Change orders for smaller projects are not processed electronically, but use a simple spreadsheet shown at the end of this section to record the change order information. And that spreadsheet entry is done by the project owner. Only designers or Interscope Plus users given the appropriate permission are allowed to create and submit change orders for review, process, and approval. The electronic change order process is used for all formal projects, both those subject to SEO oversight and what they used to call university download projects. So university change orders follows a slightly different approval process, with the final approval being at the university level rather than at SCO. So, and there is a change coming to the system for that with the new authority for universities for projects between the $2 million and $4 million threshold. That final approval will happen at the university system office level. So you'll see that coming later this year. So construction contract change order processing steps that have SEO final approval. So there are a couple of actors. We have the designer, the contractor, the owner project manager, and the SEO project manager, which is the monitor. So let me put a caveat in here. With a design build project, the designer and contractor, that approval level is going to be combined for the design builder. So instead of it showing a designer and contractor, it's just going to say design build. Then it's going to go to the owner project manager and then to SEO for final approval. So there are a couple of things that have to happen prior to a change order being put in the system, and we're calling those prerequisites. A project exists with a project type that defines SEO final approval for change orders. And that change order approval process is done at the package level. So you would designate there, especially since we have design build and some of the university projects that have up to 4 million, there's a toggle button and you have to change that. It should automatically come up with SEO, but some of them may need to be changed. So keep that in mind. A design contract has been executed under this project and is active. So again, that status jumps in there. It has to be in an active status. The construction contract has to be executed and it has to be under the status of under construction. So the workflow steps, the designer creates a change order and then the designer submits the change order for approval. So I know that seems kind of weird that that's a two-step process, but occasionally there'll be change orders that are larger, that have multiple PCOs in there, and the designer has the ability, while it's in create, to save that change order, go get some information, or they get interrupted, and then they can come back to that change order. So once that change order is as they want it to be, they can submit it for approval. And then the contractor gets an email alert that it's ready for review and to approve or reject. And then once that approval happens, then the system will alert the designer and they will go in and review and approve the contractor's approval. There are spaces in each of those that they can add comments. So that's why that is there, for it to go back to the designer. And then once the designer approves, then it will send an alert to the project owner to review and approve. And then it goes to the SEO project manager for review and approval. So a construction contract change order with the owner having the final approval. So the actors are the same as the designer, contractor, and the project owner, except state construction's not in the approval process. Same thing, there are a couple of prerequisites. A project has to exist, and it has to define the owner as the final approval for change orders. And that's happening on that package tab where you're going to toggle that it's final or owner final approval. The design contract must be executed and in a status of active. The construction contract must be executed and in a status of under construction. Workflow steps are going to be the same as before. You've got the designer creating and submitting, then the contractor reviews, then the designer reviews and approves the contractor's approval, and then it goes to the owner project manager for review and final approval. So SEO is out of that step this time. So this one is for an informal. This is a change order entry with no workflow. The only person involved in this particular change order type is the project owner. A project has to exist, and the project type must define no workflow approval for change orders. A design contract has been executed under the project and is in the status of active. Construction contracts executed with the status of under construction. The owner project manager enters all the change orders using a spreadsheet data entry screen. So let me come back to that project type where it says it defines no workflow approval for change orders. That can be changed at each package level. You have that toggle. But the project type and the oversight on this project is going to be what determines what the workflow is, or a workflow or not. So let's get into this and take a look at it. For formal projects, change orders to create the change order. Each proposed change order, which is a PCO, requires supporting documentation to be uploaded for review and acceptance. A PCO cannot be added without supporting documentation. So you just can't go in and willy-nilly and say, hey, we've got $3,000 extra and we're going to give it to the contractor. You got to have some backup and supporting documentation. So it's best to have all of that in place before you start your change order. After logging in, the designer is going to select the Active Construction Contracts tab on the home screen, and then select the contract for which the change order will be entered. And once they click on it, so you can see here, there's that link to the contract. They've identified the correct contract, and they're going to double click to open. So once it opens, it's going to take them to the package tab and click on the construction contracts. And then once in the construction contracts, you're going to click on the construction contract. So you're kind of drilling down into the project at this point. And this is from the designer's perspective. So that's why we're not doing this hands-on, because if you don't have a designer view, you won't see what I'm showing you right now. So once they're in the construction contract, they're going to tap on or click on the change orders. And then from the action tab, there should be a green plus sign that says add change order. Now, if all of the statuses that we talked about earlier are not in place, then this green plus sign is not going to show up for them. So I click on that add change order, a change order screen is going to pop open. There are red asterisks and red borders around particular fields here. They're going to want to be sure to enter all of the appropriate information. So the first thing under the designer summary is asking for schedule items affected by this change. So you want to put that information in, or they do. And then, can the contractor mitigate the change without requiring a contract time extension? That's a yes or no. And then, are additional costs incurred by reason of the time extension? And that's a yes or no. So underneath there, there's an estimated cost of change, estimated time extension field. And then once that data is entered, then they're going to have to upload that backup documentation. So from here, if they don't upload that, they can't proceed. So the file uploader pops up. They're going to choose the file and click upload. Once that's uploaded, it's saved, and it'll show a change order number with the next sequential number available under the status, and the workflow icon appears. So then the workflow, you've got, for this one, State Construction has the final approval. So there are 6 pieces to this workflow. And then underneath there, it's got the designer summary, and that's the information that they should have entered previously. Something else I wanted to show you. Add multiple PCOs under a change order. So if you had multiple parts to this particular change order, underneath the action tab, they can click on add additional PCO. So here in this bottom block, you've got PCO breakdown, and it's got PCO number 1. So there could be multiple PCOs, but it's going to give you have to give a general description of the PCO and then the reason for the change, then the PCO cost and the number of days. So if it's increasing the number of days of the contract, this is how you increase the days. Not all change orders are additions. Sometimes there's a deduct. Something came in less expensive than what was anticipated, or they had put something into the contract that is no longer needed. Once they got into the project, they're like, oh, well, we don't have to dig up this section because we got what we needed, whatever it might be. And then you'll see a cause code over here, and it's for SEO use only. And that cause code is going to be, is it from error and omission, unforeseen, and those are things that the project monitor or whoever's got that final approval can toggle that and determine what the cause of the change order was. Because in a perfect world, we would never have a change order, right? But we know we don't live in a perfect world. So I'm going to move back down. So it goes through this workflow. So the designer may continue to make changes to the change order using the action save up until the time that the change order is submitted. Now, once the change order is submitted, it becomes a permanent record of the system. There is no deleting it. While the designer is in the submit section or the create section, they can go into the action tab, and I think they have a delete button. But once it's submitted, there is no deleting it. If it's incorrect, then it has to get rejected and corrected or go all the way through the process. And at the final, it gets rejected. But until you get that correct or get this one moved forward, you can't approve the next one. Oh, this is a bigger screen of what I was telling you about a second ago about the PCO and add data connection, the reason for the changes and the PCO cost and days. So out here, you don't see that SEO. That won't show up until it gets to the final approver. And the designer may choose to abandon or delete the change order using the action button, but once it's submitted, no changes or deletes are allowed. And you can see here under that action button that they also have the add PCO option. So they could put in multiple PCOs under one change order. To complete the workflow step, the designer must submit the change order to initiate its review and approval by other project participants. Up to this point, no other project participant has been involved in the change order process. So they haven't gotten any alerts. Unless they've told you it's out there, you really have no way of seeing or knowing that it's out there. Submit the change order by selecting the Submit button under the workflow, and then a confirmation window will appear to confirm this action. You would select yes or no, yes to continue, no to return. And then the change order workflow is updated and processes any alerts that are defined for this step. The system is configured to send alerts to the owner, contractor, and project monitor. An alert is sent for each logon associated with each project role. So for you as project owners, if you have multiple people on your campus that are CPCs, then this alert is going to go to every CPC listed with your campus. Now, if you have a lot of projects going on and everybody doesn't want to get alerts for your project, then you can go in and name yourself as project manager. At the project level, you would see it on most every screen from the project tab down. And what that does is that just routes all alerts just to you and not to all of your coworkers. But keep in mind that once you make that designation, then only you can approve or disapprove change orders or any changes in the system. So the alerts look similar to this. They change occasionally, so it may not be this exact screen. But it tells you what workflow step you're in. Step 2 of 6, submit designer. So if you're the project owner, you probably don't need anything to do anything with this. It's just truly an alert letting you know what's going on. Sorry, I'm putting myself on mute to cough so I don't cough in your ear. These allergies are killing me today. So to access the change order, you can simply click on the link at the bottom of the email alert. You'll be prompted to log on to Interscope, and then it will take you directly to that change order page. And you can see that workflow process. So for reviewing and approving, each participant will receive an alert via email concerning the actions for each change order. When the contractor logs on, they'll see change orders in process as a clipboard or a tab on their home page. And when they select the change order, they can view the workflow activity of that particular change order. And then they can also see change orders that are waiting for their action, and they're highlighted in yellow. So at this workflow step, there are only two options they can perform, and that would be approve or reject. And you can see that sample there in the workflow. Approving the change order moves the process along to the next step in the workflow. Rejecting the change order at any step causes the change order to be returned to step 2, where the originator or the designer can change and resubmit. The workflow is then reset, and the audit trail, which is found at the bottom of the page, maintains a record of the prior workflow events. So you can see next year when you go back and look at it that, hey, they had a rejection and it went back through the workflow. And then the whole process continues until there's a final approval. And then alerts are sent to all project participants as a notification that the change order has officially been approved. And that's what it looks like in the big screen. You've got workflow, approve and reject. The owner must certify once it gets to their approval piece. They have to certify that there's sufficient funds available for the change order before approving. Sufficient funding must be reflected in Interscope before the change will be approved by SCO. So what it does is it gives them a little snippet of the financial worksheet. You can see what funds are assigned, what's available to commit, what this change is going to do to those funds. And so the owner has to certify yes or a no. And if there are no funds available to cover it, then you're going to want to go in and get your funds covered before you approve it. Change orders must be submitted and approved in sequence. There are safeguards in place to check for any outstanding prior change orders before a newer change order can be approved. Now you can enter 15 change orders, but the system's only is going to do 1, 2, 3. It's going to do it sequentially. So the idea of you going in and creating a change order to fix a previous change order's money, it doesn't work that way. So you're going to have to do it sequentially. Change orders may also be deleted at any time before submission, and that's at the designer level or the creator level. That's why it's in create. The system will review current sequence of change orders and resequence them as appropriate to maintain a consistent ordering. Any questions about formal change orders before I move on? The informal change orders. Okay. So let's move on to informal. These are pretty simple. They're easy. It involves making entries to identify the nature of the change, the cost, the impact on contract days, and it's done in a spreadsheet format on the change order tab. So if it's an informal project, it's informal change order, and you click on the change order tab and you just see change order, description, days, amount. Your instinct is to click in change order and put in change order number 1, but the system will sequence them for you. So if you click in that description box, it should highlight itself yellow. Again, this is based on those statuses for your design contract, construction contract, and package, and that there being enough money there to cover it. So you would click on the description box, enter the description of the change, tab over to the number of days and enter any number of days that are changing. They're automatically numbered. I already told you that. You may enter as many change orders as necessary and then click Action Save, and the changes are reflected in the change order summary above. So as you save, you will see these numbers update based on what you have in your change orders below. You can see once this one was changed, you can see the number of days changed and then the amount changed. And then over in the contract amount on the project financial worksheet, this is at the contract detail tab. You'll see that contract amount change. It'll fill in the change order and the number of days. And that works the same way for formals and informals, that it will continue to update that contract amount. Any questions on the informals? Okay, I do have a question in the chat box, or a statement. It says, just had a change order where funds were not needed and given back. So yeah, that sometimes happens, you know, if we can do a deduct. So how you would do a deduct is it would work the same way as a change order, except let's say it's $1,100 coming back to you, then you would just do a negative 1,100. So it would add that money back, or it would deduct it from what's committed or what's been spent on that contract. So yeah, that's a good question. So that's how deducts work, is you just put a negative or a dash in front of your dollars. So let's talk about hub. So let's talk about the guidelines for recruitment and selection of minority businesses for participation in state contracts. So this is in accordance with General Statute 143-128.2. This was effective January 1, 2002. And these guidelines establish goals for minority participation in single prime bidding, separate prime bidding, construction manager at risk, and alternative contracting methods on state construction projects in the amount of $300,000 or more. The legislation provides that the state shall have a verifiable 10% goal for participation by minority businesses in the total value of work for each project for which a contract or contracts are awarded. And these requirements are published to accomplish that end. So this is 8 pages. I am not going to read all 8 pages of it, but I would definitely go out. Well, I actually emailed this to you. So take some time, read through it, know this, that, you know, we do have a general statute that's telling us that we shall have a verifiable 10% goal. So anytime you see the word shall in legislation, that means you will do this. It's not an option. So this, we want to follow this as closely as we can. So it gives the intent the state of North Carolina as an awarding authority for construction projects, and the contractors and subcontractors performing the construction contracts awarded shall cooperate and in good faith do all things legal, proper, and reasonable to achieve the statutory goal of 10% for participation by minority businesses in each construction project as mandated by the General Statute 143-128.2. Nothing in these guidelines shall be construed to require contractors or awarding authorities to award contracts or subcontracts to or to make purchases of materials or equipment from minority business contractors or minority business subcontractors who do not submit the lowest responsive bid or bids. So you'll see that this is speaking specifically to construction contracts. So design is done on qualifications based. So that's a little different. We're just speaking directly about construction contracts right now. So it gives the definitions of what minority means as a person or a citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States and who is Black, Hispanic, Asian American, American Indian, or female. A minority business means at least 51% of the business is owned by one or more minority persons, or in the case of a corporation, in which at least 51% of the stock is owned by one or more minority persons or socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, and of which the management and daily business operations are controlled by one or more of the minority persons or socially and economically disadvantaged individuals who own it. So it speaks to what is socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. It's defined in 15 U.S.C. 637 as individuals who have been subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias because of their identity as a member of a group without regard to their individual qualities. It talks about what a public entity is, which means state and all public subdivisions and local governmental units. The owner is the state of North Carolina through the agency institution named in the contract. A designer is any person or firm, partnership, or corporation which has been contracted with the state of North Carolina to perform architectural or engineering work. A bidder, it defines who that is. A contract is a mutually binding legal relationship or any modification thereof, obligating the seller to furnish equipment, materials, or services, including construction, and obligating the buyer to pay for them. Contractor, subcontractor, talks about responsibilities. And the Hub Office was established as a program which allows interested persons or businesses qualifying as a minority business under General Statute 143-128.2 to obtain certification from the state of North Carolina procurement system. It gives a lot of different responsibilities of the Hub Office. They maintain a current list of minority businesses. They inform minority businesses on how to identify and obtain contracting and subcontracting opportunities, inform minority businesses of the contracting and subcontracting process for public construction. Talks about they work with North Carolina trade and professional organizations. They also oversee the minority business program by assisting in implementing training, which they do an excellent job at that. Identifying and implementing outreach efforts, they're great at that too, and reporting the results of the minority business utilization to the Secretary of the Department of Administration, the Governor, and the General Assembly. So the State Construction Office is responsible for the following: to furnish to the Hub Office a minimum of 21 days prior to the bid opening the following information: project description and location, locations where bidding documents may be reviewed, name of a representative of the owner who can be contacted during the advertising period to advise who the prospective bidders are, date, time, and location of the bid opening, and date, time, and location of pre-bid conference if scheduled. And then attending scheduled pre-bid conference if necessary to clarify requirements, review the apparent low bidder's statutory compliance. And I'm just giving you a high-level overview of these. You can read through them. Reviewing of minority business requirements, monitoring of contractors' compliance with minority business requirements, provide statistical data and required reports to the Hub Office, resolve any protests and disputes arising after implementation of the plan. Then the owner, before awarding a contractor, the owner shall do the following: develop and implement a minority business participation outreach plan to identify minority businesses that can perform public building projects. Attend the scheduled pre-bid meeting. At least 10 days prior to the scheduled day of bid opening, notify minority businesses. And then it gives the information of what they're notifying them with. Utilize other media as appropriate. Maintain documentation of any contacts, correspondence. Review jointly with the designer all requirements of the statute, and evaluate documentation to determine good faith efforts. Review prime contractors' pay applications for compliance. Make documentation showing evidence of implementation of owner's responsibilities. And then it gets down to the designer. Under the single prime bidding, separate prime bidding, construction manager at risk, or CMR alternative contracting method, the designer will attend the scheduled pre-bid meeting, assist the owner to identify and notify prospective minority businesses, prime and subs, maintain documentation of contacts, correspondence, review jointly with the owner the requirements of the statute. During the construction phase of the project, they will review the MBE documentation for contract payment, which is Appendix E, and we will look at that today. Make documentation showing evidence of implementation of the designer's responsibility. And then for the prime contractor, the CMR, or its first tier subcontractors, under the single prime bidding, the separate prime bidding, CMR, and alternate contracting methods, the contractor will attend the pre-bid conference, identify or determine those work areas of a subcontract where minority businesses may have an interest in performing sub work. At least 10 days prior to the scheduled day of bid opening, they will notify minority businesses of potential contracting opportunities listed in the proposal, and the notification will include a description of the work, the name of the individual within the company who will be available to answer questions, where bid documents may be reviewed, special requirements that may exist, such as insurance, license, bonds, financial arrangements. And then if there are more than 3 minority businesses in the general locality of the project who offer similar contracting or subcontracting services, the contractor shall notify 3 but may contact more. During the bid process, they'll comply with contractors' requirements, identify on the bid the minority businesses that will be utilized, make documentation showing evidence of implementation of the PM, CM at risk, and first tier subcontractors. Upon being named the apparent low bidder, the bidder shall provide one of the following: an affidavit C that includes the description of the portion of work to be executed. And we will go over affidavit C today. And then businesses express percentage of the total contract price, which is equal to or less than the applicable goal. If the percentage is not equal to the goal, then there shall be documentation of good faith efforts taken to meet the goal. Failure to comply with these requirements is grounds for rejection of the bid and award to the next lowest responsible and responsive bidder. And that can and will happen. So you want to be sure that you've got all your I's dotted and T's crossed there. The contractor shall identify the name of minority business subcontractors and corresponding dollar amount of the work on the schedule of values. The schedule of values can be provided as required in Article 31 of the general conditions of the contract to facilitate payments to the subcontractors. I'm going to stop right there for a second. So I know we're getting really deep into the weeds here, and a lot of this information, like the Article 31 and general conditions, that will be covered in the CPC training. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into that because we could take a right turn and be gone for a long time. And I just want to show you what's required in Interscope and what the backup is for it. So the contractor shall submit with each monthly pay request the final payment, MBE documentation for contract amount, and Appendix E for the designer's review. During the construction of a project, at any time, if it becomes necessary to replace a minority business subcontractor, you should immediately advise the owner, the state construction office, and the director of the hub office in writing of the circumstances involved. The prime contractor shall make a good faith effort to replace a minority business subcontractor with another minority business subcontractor. And if during the construction of the project additional subcontracting opportunities become available, you would make a good faith effort to solicit sub bids from minority businesses. It is the intent of these requirements to apply to all contractors performing as prime contractor and first tier subcontractor under the construction manager at risk on state projects. So then it talks about the minority business responsibilities, dispute procedures. Section 5, these guidelines shall apply. Yeah, that just tells you where to send information. And then there's an application with guidelines for recruitment and selection of minority businesses. And then the subcontract goals. And this talks about affidavit B. The bidder must identify on its bid the minority businesses that will be utilized on the project with corresponding total dollar value for the bid and affidavit A, listing good faith efforts, or affidavit B of self-performance work. And that's typically the goal for participation is set at 10% for subcontractors across the state. If you have a project, like if you're in Charlotte or Raleigh or Durham with the project, that goal could be set higher because the concentration of minority subcontractors is much higher in those areas. Let's say if you were in Hyde County or in gosh, what's that county? There's another county way out, and maybe it's Ashe County out in the mountains. That if you look in Interscope and you search for minority businesses in those counties, there aren't any. So those goals may be at that 10%. You know, there would be no reason to try to have more than 10%, knowing that there aren't any subcontractors in that particular area. But in your more metropolitan areas where your opportunity to have a higher percentage is there, you will occasionally see projects that will have a higher goal than 10%. But in the system, it's by default at 10% because that's what legislation says. So this one talks about provide affidavit D and C, and we're going to go through each one of these affidavits and go through the required documentation and what each one requires. Minimum compliance requirements. Failure to comply with any of these statements, affidavits, or intents with the minority business guidelines shall constitute a breach of the contract. A finding by the state that any information submitted either prior to award of the contract or during the performance of the contract is inaccurate, false, or incomplete shall also constitute a breach of the contract. Any such breach may result in termination of the contract in coordination with the termination provisions contained in the contract. It shall be solely at the option of the state whether to terminate the contract for breach. And then here are some determining whether a contractor has made good faith efforts. The state will evaluate all efforts made by the contract and will determine compliance in regard to quantity, intensity, and results of these efforts. Good faith efforts include contacting minority businesses that reasonably could have been expected to submit a quote and that were known to the contractor or available on state or local government maintained list at least 10 days before the bid or proposal date, and notifying them of the nature and the scope of the work. Making the construction plans, specifications, and requirements available for review by prospective minority businesses, or providing these documents to them at least 10 days before bid or proposals are due. Breaking down or combining elements of work into economically feasible units to facilitate minority participation, working with minority trades, community or contractor organizations identified by the Hub Office, and include in the bid documents that provide assistance in recruitment of minority businesses. Attending any pre-bid meetings scheduled by the public owner, which I think that's a given. You need to at least send somebody, right? Provide assistance in giving required bonding or insurance, providing alternatives to bonding or insurance for subs, negotiate in good faith with interested minority businesses and not rejecting them as unqualified without sound reasons based on their capabilities. Any rejection of a minority business based on lack of qualification should have the reasons documented in writing. Provide assistance to an otherwise qualified minority business in need of equipment, loan capital, lines of credit, or joint pay agreements to secure loans, supplies, or letters of credit, including waiving credit that's ordinarily required, assisting minority businesses in obtaining the same unit pricing with the bidder's suppliers in order to help them in establishing credit, negotiating joint ventures and partnership arrangements with minority businesses in order to increase opportunities for minority business participation on public construction or repair projects when possible, and provide quick pay agreements and policies to enable minority contractors and suppliers to meet cash flow demands. So these are in the good faith efforts box in Interscope that you check off, and it has a weighted value of points, and they have to have 50 points to be considered responsive. These are your 10 criteria. So I told you we'd look at Appendix E, which is the MBE documentation for contract payments. Before I move into that, though, do we have any questions about anything we've covered in those first 7 pages? So this is what the MBE documentation for contract payments looks like. It's got the prime, the address, phone number, project name, pay application, and the period. And it's a list of payments made to MBEs or minority business enterprises on this project for the stated period. So you've got the MBE firm, the type, the amount paid this month, total payments to date, and total amount committed. Gives the minority categories. You're going to date, approve, or certify. And this should get submitted with each pay request and final application. So we'll move into the documentation that goes with hubs. So now that we have a general idea of why we have the hub and what it does, here are the documents that back it up. All of these can be found on our website under the Documents tab. And then I think there's one that says for bidding. It may be separated out into hub, but it's definitely, some of this has got to go with the bid. So you can see at the top all the way across, it says attached to bid, attached to bid. So this has to come with the bid. So it's an identification of hub certified minority business participation. So this is from your prime or your CMR. Well, the CMR may not put this in yet because that's part of his risk, that they don't know who their subcontractors are going to be at the time of bidding. Do hereby certify that on this project we will use the following hub certified minority businesses as construction subcontractors, vendors, suppliers, or providers of professional service. So you would give the firm name, address, and phone number, the type of work, the minority category, and if they're hub certified, yes or no. So sometimes your minority or your hubs could potentially be certified, but they're not at the time of bid. So you can put them in touch with the hub office, and if they can be certified, then they will assist them to get certified. So they would list all of this out. It gives you the minority categories again. And then at the bottom for this asterisk, it said hub certification with the state hub office is required to be counted towards state participation goals. So that participation goal, they have to be certified for the percentage of what you're paying them to go towards that 10% goal. Does that make sense? So this tells us that this is the total of minority business contracting will be. So you would total up how much work all of these folks are going to be, the dollar value. So this one gets attached to the bid by the contractor. The next one is affidavit A. This one also gets attached to the bid. You can see across the top. It's the listing of the good faith efforts, and the affidavit of would be the contractor that's submitting the bid, and they say, I have made a good faith effort to comply under the following areas checked. So bidders must earn at least 50 points from the good faith efforts listed for their bid to be considered responsive. And this comes from the North Carolina Administrative Code, and it gives the code number. So these are those 10 criteria that I just read to you. And now we can see that they have a weighted value in there. So at a bare minimum, I would think 5 would always be checked. So they've got 10 points for attending the pre-bid meetings. And then provide quick pay. So they've got 30 points right out of the gate, but they have to break down maybe break down some of the work, do the bonding or insurance provided. But here's a statement. It says the undersigned, if a parent low bidder, will enter into a formal agreement with the firms listed in the identification of minority business participation schedule and conditional upon scope of contract to be executed with the owner. Substitution of contractors must be in accordance with General Statute 142-128.2d. Failure to abide by these statutory provision will constitute a breach of the contract. And then they're saying that they certify that they have read the terms of the minority business commitment and is authorized to bind the bidder to the commitment herein set forth. So this is going to be signed by an authorized officer of that contracting firm, and it's going to also be notarized. This one again gets turned in with the bid. Affidavit B also gets attached to the bid, and it's certifying that it is their intent to perform 100% of the work required for whatever project. In making the certification, the bidder states that they do not customarily subcontract elements of this type of work or project and normally perform and has the capability to perform all elements of the work with their own workforce. So that means they're not using any subs. That doesn't happen very often. One incident that I could think of that would happen would be like Lindsay Precast. I think they're the ones that did the underground walking tube, if you will, that's concreted. I think there's one over at NC State where they actually do their own concrete, they do their own casting and their own installation. So they're not subbing out any of their work. But so you would have an occasion where you would use it, but not often. So they certify that they have read the certification and they're authorized to bind the bidder to the commitments. This one gets signed by an authorized officer and it also has to be notarized. So this one is Affidavit B and it gets attached to the bid if applicable. So if they did Affidavit B, they wouldn't have to do Affidavit A. So you shouldn't have to do both. Now this one does not get submitted with the bid, but it's Affidavit C, where a portion of the work will be performed by Hub Certified. This one only gets sent in or submitted when you're the apparent lowest responsive bidder. So if the portion of the work to be executed by Hub Certified or minority business as defined in General Statute 143.28 is greater or equal or greater than 10% of the bidder's total contract price, then the bidder must complete this affidavit. This affidavit has to be provided by the apparent lowest responsive bidder within 72 hours of being notified of the low bidder. So they're going to put in the amount of their bid, who they are, the project name. They will expend a minimum of whatever that percentage is. It has to be at least 10% right there of the total dollar amount of the contract with minority business enterprises. Minority businesses will be employed as construction contractors, vendors, suppliers, or providers of professional services. Such work will be subcontracted to the following firms listed below. So now your bidder or contractor is telling you who his subs are. So it's going to list the name, phone number, minority category, description of work, and the dollar value. Pursuant to General Statute 143-128.2d, the undersigned will enter into a formal agreement with minority firms for work listed in the schedule, conditional upon execution of a contract with the owner. Failure to fulfill this commitment may constitute a breach of the contract. The undersigned hereby certifies that they have read the terms of this commitment and is authorized to bind the bidder. Gets signed by an authorized officer and also notarized. So that one doesn't come with the bid. It comes 72 hours after they've been chosen or selected as the lowest responsive bidder. Affidavit D does not get submitted with the bid. It's the good faith efforts. This one gets submitted only by the apparent lowest responsive bidder. If the goal of 10% is not achieved, the bidder shall provide the following documentation to the owner of their good faith efforts. So let me give you some examples of documentation that may be required to demonstrate the bidder's good faith effort. Copies of solicitations for quotes to at least 3 minority bid business firms from the source listed provided by the state for each subcontract to be let. Each solicitation shall contain a specific description of the work to be subcontracted. Location where bid documents can be reviewed, representative of the prime bidder to contact the location, date, and time where the quotes can be received. Copies of quotes or responses received from each firm responding to the solicitation. A telephone log of follow-up calls for each firm sent a solicitation. For subcontracts where a minority business firm is not considered the lowest responsible subbidder, copies of quotes received from all firms submitting quotes for that particular subcontract. Documentation of any contracts or correspondence to minority businesses, community, or contractor organizations in an attempt to meet the goal. A copy of the pre-bid roster. Letter documenting efforts to provide assistance in obtaining required bonding or insurance for minority businesses. A letter detailing reasons for rejection of minority businesses due to lack of qualification. A letter documenting proposed assistance offered to minority business in need of equipment, loan capital, lines of credit, or joint pay agreements to secure loans, supplies, or letter of credit included waiving the credit. Failure to provide the documentation as listed in these provisions may result in rejection of the bid and award to the next lowest responsive bidder. And then pursuant to General Statute 143-128-2D, the undersigned will enter into a formal agreement with minority firms for work listed in the schedule conditional upon execution of the contract with the owner. Failure to fulfill this commitment may constitute a breach of the contract. So there are a couple ways to breach contracts, and I think I've listed them all. This one also has to be signed by the authorized officer and notarized. Any questions about any of those affidavits? Or what's required of those affidavits? Okay, so we've talked about the affidavits. Let's see if we can talk about hub entries, when and where to enter the data and how it gets reported. So we don't have any questions so far about the affidavit. So I'm just going to navigate to the construction contract in the Interscope, and then we're going to take a look at the good faith efforts and hub participation. So everything that we just went through, we went through the legislation, we looked at the backup documentation. Now here's where we're going to transfer that information into Interscope. So we've got the affidavits, we've got affidavit B, C, and D, and we just walked through each of those. For this particular project, they are using affidavit C, but you can see here there's a link from the state construction manual that you can take a look at those good faith effort forms. So if I click on that, it's going to take me right out to our website. And if I look at the MBE participation forms, already got it open. Okay. So that is everything that we just walked through. It's those same documents. And that's just the link to it. So back over here. And because they used affidavit C, that information transferred down here, and then they uploaded their supporting documents here. And because they picked C, then affidavit A for good faith efforts was required. And you can see that they uploaded that supporting documentation, but also checked off all of the boxes from what was sent in with the bid. So that's where we record that information in Interscope. And then on the HUD participation tab, it shows our general contractor is the Christman Group, and they're not a hub. So you can see for award that all hubs is at 10% and subs are at 10%. And that's based on the contractor information that was entered here and these dollar values for awarded. And so what they put in for an award was 517,000, and that is about 10.1% of the construction contract total amount. So that's where those numbers are coming from and based off of the documentation. So you can see how now the data is flowing all the way through the system. Now under current, for current contract, they're only showing what's been awarded, not what's been paid. So this project's still in process. So maybe they haven't paid any of the subs yet, or they just haven't entered it. I don't know what the situation is. But once they enter those amounts for the current contract here, then that percentage will be reflected here under this current column. And if they had additional ones to add, you would click add subcontractor and add it. And we did that in the intro training as well. And you can see that the source of the information came from affidavit C. So once this project's finished and they've entered their current contracts, they would change this status to finalization and then check mark this hub data is final as of, and it's going to default to today, but you would put in whatever day it truly is final as of. And then that's what's going to trigger the reporting for the hub office and the governor's office. So any questions about where to put in your hub data? So we know where the hub data comes from and the documents that support that. And then these are the two screens where we're going to enter that data into the system. Any questions about where to enter that information? So to report that hub data, if you scroll all the way over on your screen to the Reports tab and click on Hub Reports, and let's click on Hub Participation. So when you're logged in, you should only be able to see your department and your agency. I'm going to look at Interscope department by agency, and I'll go back and look at NC State. And I can do it by date range or by fiscal year. It's typically reported by fiscal year. At last year, and I want to look at finalization. And I can toggle any of these. We're not using the Connect NC bonds reporting anymore, so that one's kind of obsolete, but the data is still out there, so we have to leave the option out there. And I only want to look at construction because that's what's going to be reported. You can look at your design and construction. It's hard to determine the design because until the project's completely finished, your design work is not going to show up until that is made complete or that design contract is made complete. And the designer typically is going to be involved with the project all the way to the very end. So it's not like you can midway go look at design work. So when I clicked on search, it showed me for my fiscal year, gave me my start, my end date, and I can scroll over and see the total. Actually, there's two scroll bars. So I've got total minority, non-minority, minority, total minority, and then it's going to give me quarter one. Let's see if I can shrink that down a little bit so it'll give me more to see on the screen. So it'll tell me by quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, and then it gives dollars first, because you can see you've got the minority dollars, and then we've got Q1 minority percent. And then you go all the way over, and then it's going to break it down by minority type by dollar and by percent. So you can look at those. You can also export that into Excel so you're not scrolling across the screen, and all of this will populate on the Excel spreadsheet. So let me see, I've got a question in the chat box. It says, would a hub designer show on the report of searching at award instead of finalization? Well, let's take a look. And I'm going to look for design only and search. So it does show it. So to answer your question, yes. And let's see if that number changes if I do design and construction. Good. Okay. So that was a good question. I don't play around with that too much because we report only on construction, so it's hard to, is there a report that can be generated to pull who your hub vendors were per quarter, similar to this report? Let's take a look and see. So we've got project detail. Let's look at the project detail. Oh gosh, I did it on every department. I meant to change that. I thought it would stay. It's going to take a minute. Back out of that. That's going to take too long. See if I just look at it for all universities, if it'll do it. And I don't know that you can see that with your view, though. Yeah, I can see everything, but you may only be able to see your particular agency or campus. It may, let's see, it tells us project. It doesn't tell you by contractor, but I think if we use this Interscope firm detail, I think that's the one that you probably are looking for. Yeah, it tells you the firm name. So the question in the chat box was, is there a report that can be generated to pull who your hub vendors are per quarter, similar to this report? I don't know that you can break it down by quarter unless you use the date range under date selection, but the Interscope firm detail, it's going to give you your agency. And then if you scroll on over, you can see the firm and if they were the prime and what their hub participation was. So that's a good question. You can export that information out to Excel. But there's also this Interscope firm report card, which I really like that one because that one may give you the information that you're really looking for here. Because it's going to tell you by firm their contract amount. Now, this is during this fiscal year, and then their spend and how they broke down, and then what their hub prime percent was. It doesn't necessarily give you what project it was on, but it will tell you who your agency or campus used during that time frame.
Hey, Leanne, this is Miriam. I'm back in.
Yay.
Just a thing to think about with that and to test as users are experimenting with getting this information. My experience has been that start date and end date is looking at the date the project was established.
Okay.
And so if you're looking for vendors that you have awarded within a certain quarter or a certain fiscal year, that may not be the parameter that gets you what you're looking for. So my best advice would be to run some reports like Leanne is doing and see what you get and look at the details and see if it's really what you want, and then maybe tweak your time frame a little bit to get closer to what you need.
That's good advice, because my assumption, because I don't run the reports, you all use them daily, is that I would think it would be that spend during that time period. So that's a good tip that Miriam's passing on. Thank you. Okay, so that's where the reports are coming from, or where you find your reports and how you can dig into those a little deeper. One additional report that I wanted to show you, and it's really more of a submission than it is a report, is we've got hub submissions. So let's click on that. And this is going to, let me break it back down to where I was. So for this fiscal year, I'm going to search. And this is going to tell us what the spend has been per quarter during that time frame. So you can see that there have been projects that were finalized, and that would be done over at the Hub Participation tab when you toggle that button from at award to finalization, and the date that you put in is going to fall into these quarters. Now, had there not been any projects finalized during that time, this would be yellow, and you would have the option to put no submissions. And let me see if I can find one that has no submissions. I probably should get out of the university. They're really good about putting their data in.
Use ours, Leanne. We haven't had any work to do any submissions.
Okay, perfect. So
The other
fine
point that I would comment on is that, Leanne, you mentioned the word spend. Just remember, these are contractual commitments. We don't really track the expenditures in Interscope in this reporting unless you do track it in that optional section where you can list the invoices and the expenditures. But what you're getting here is what you're reporting as the commitment that came, for example, on those affidavits when you open the bids, and then you have updated them based on change orders. So this isn't really spend in terms of actual expenditures.
Thank you, Miriam. That's why I love having her on here, because we don't always all use the same terminology, but it makes more sense when she lays it out like that, because I may say something but mean something else. So keep me straight, Miriam. I appreciate that. So here we've got this Q1 data, and it says no projects finalized. So it's yellow, so there haven't been any projects finalized. So the Hub office would like for you to come in and put no projects finalized for whatever quarter is coming up that they've sent you an alert about, to let you know that, or it lets the Hub office know that you know that you're not reporting any Hub data for that particular quarter, and then you would action save it. So, but as long as you're finalizing in that Hub participation tab, it will automatically move your numbers over to this quarter. But if you know you don't have any numbers to report for this quarter, you just let the Hub office know by clicking this no projects finalized and then action save. Are there any questions about Hub? Hub, where to enter data, where the data comes from, and when it gets reported, and where to report from. Okay, so we've covered the Hub entries. So Miriam, I got out of order when we came back from break. We did change orders first, and then we came back and did Hub entries. So we've done change orders, we've done Hub entries. Any questions before we move on to closeout and the data requirements to close statuses and documents?
Leanne, did you mention when you were doing change orders, the anticipated change in how the system office change orders will be handled in Interscope?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I did that. And if you want to add anything to that, please do. But we talked about that they would have the campus level would be the final approver up to that $2 million mark. And then from 2 million to 4 million, it would be the system office that would have final approval. And then anything over 4 million would be the state construction office.
Well, the major issue is that right now we don't have that electronic process over $500,000, as you're noting, with the right authority. And so that is going to be changing. We hope soon.
We hope soon. Yeah, we've got that work in QA, so I hope we can get that tested and pushed out in the next couple of weeks.
And in that change, the system office will be the final approval for everything that we award, which is everything above 500 but under 4 million. So it'll be us in that time, in that range, and then state construction over 4 million. So the system office will play the same role for projects that we're the awarding authority for, that state construction does for projects that they're the awarding authority for. So more to come.
More to come, more to come. Any questions about hub entries, change orders before we move on? I'll give you a second. You'll just give me a thumbs up and let me know that you all are still out there, that you're with me. Great. Thank you. So we'll move into closeout since everybody seems to be good. Okay. So the closeout process, that's going to change too, but it will be coming down the road, and I'll tell you about those changes as we get into it. So the closeout process for formal and informal agency projects, or even community college and university projects. The closeout happens when the project's completed and all hub data has been entered, all evaluations have been completed, and the project progress or the project status that's showing on the package detail tab has been toggled to 100%, and the package status is ready for closeout. So there are a couple of things that have to happen before we can start closeout process. So the workflow involved with a construction closeout is the designer has to update and submit. So they have to, works kind of like the change order process where it's in a creating mode and then they submit it, but they have to submit all of the needed documents. And then the state construction office today has the final approval and then it gets approved. So with that approval process, for the projects that have oversight at the community college level or university level, the change that will be coming to the system is that they will have that final approval, not the state construction office, because you all saw the project all the way through. So the final acceptance date has to be entered into the system. This is the only place in Interscope that a date is entered directly into the milestones and that data is not pulled from another tab in Interscope. So final acceptance is done at the package milestones tab, and you can see it's circled right here. You want to be sure that that data is entered into the actual tab or the actual column as opposed to planned. And that the package detail tab, the status there has to be in punch list, accepted, closeout, or beneficial occupancy. And if it's not in one of those statuses, then your construction closeout tab is not going to show up for the designer to see. So here it is again, beneficial occupancy, punch list, accepted, or closeout. The progress report has to be 100% complete. Hub data has to be finalized and evaluations have to be complete. So this is a little pre-work that you want to do prior to starting your closeout process. So for the closeout progress report, that is found at the package tab under progress report tab. And you can see the percentages here. They have to be moved to 100%. Now, if this project has state construction oversight, your project monitor is going to be moving this percentage as the project progresses. And as they have the monthly meetings, they'll continue to move that percentage up until it gets to 100%. They have the ability to put comments in. A lot of times this is where you'll find your monitor notes of what's happening. The projects that have your oversight, like if it's a university or community college, the project manager can go in on a monthly basis or whenever and put in that progress data, make comments, and you can also change that percentage as you go, which is really helpful to keep that percentage updated, because as reports get pulled for the legislature or for the Board of Governors, it would be helpful for them to see where the true percentage of the project is or what the completion percentage is. And Miriam may want to speak to that a little bit as well for the progress percentage.
No, I don't have anything to add there.
Okay, great. So the hub data has to be finalized, and you have to change that status under the hub participation tab to finalization. And there's a checkbox here that you want to check and then put the date that the hub data is final. Then when you click that, it's going to automatically toggle to the date of whatever day you're working in it, but it can be changed to in the past, but not in the future. Then the evaluations have to be done. You can see the evaluations tab in several different places. You can see it at the project level. You can see the designer evaluation at the designer tab and construction contract tab. You can also see it at the package tab. We walked through and did evaluations in the intro class. This will walk you through as well and tell you how to do the download the evaluation form, how to score the evaluation form, and then how to upload the evaluation form. And then you want to mark the project as complete. And it looks like my bubble box covered up where it was supposed to be. But you want to check that box and then action save and then mark it complete and action save. So that's a two-step process there. At the project level closeout, you can see there's a little matrix at the project tab, and then click over to closeout project, and it will tell you all of these boxes need to be checked. So this is kind of a cheat sheet, so you'll know what work you need to do to close your project out. But for the construction closeout piece of it, this is the designer's view, what you're seeing here. As the project owner, you're not going to see that tab here that says go to construction closeout details. But once that status at the project level is toggled to closeout or one of those other three, it's going to send an alert to the designer and let them know that this project's ready to close out and they need to put their project work in. I do have a question in the chat box. It says, are evaluations needed for contracts under both formal and informal projects? Yes, that evaluation shows up regardless. Only exception may be hub only projects don't have evaluations, but the rest of them will show up with evaluations. So once the designer is in the system and they click on that closeout, it's going to populate a workflow for closeout. And then at the bottom, there are 5 tabs that populate that are different documents that are needed to get projects closed out. So if it's an informal project, and I may cover this later, but it will automatically go over to the construction closeout tab, which is number 3 right here. And it's going to require the certification of compliance and certification of completion. So for informals, those are the only 2 documents that are required to close out. But if you want to require others, you can do that. You can ask for them to go ahead and fill out everything. But those are the only 2 required to move the workflow. So the inspection documents, there's a designer's verification of punch list, and then the final inspection for owner occupancy, and a partial utilization for beneficial occupancy, if applicable. So that's the screen blown up, and that's what it would look like. Now, once you click into these blue links, it will take the designer out to the SEO website, and they can pull that document down from the system, fill it out, and then upload it. That's what it looks like when it takes you out there. This is what the documents look like, the final inspection forms. And then the partial utilization, and it'll take you out, and that's the partial utilization. But upload those. Actually, let's take a look at those documents. I want you to see them. So under inspections, we've got final inspection for owner occupancy. It's got all the pertinent project information. And the designer, there's a designer statement here, and it says the designer provides information to the owner and the state construction office that the project has been evaluated and field inspected to ensure that all construction meets contract requirements for final inspection to allow occupancy by the owning agency. And then the designer has their signature there, and then the project description. And then here's the backup data with the contractor's approval documents. And it's asking for the contractor's statement of completion with request for designer's inspection, the pre-final punch list inspection, the owning agency and state construction office verification that the punch list has been completed, and then the scheduled final inspection by designer accompanied by the owning agency and the state construction office. And so it would give the date. If it's not applicable, then they would just X the box. But you've got the SEO electrical inspection, or the certificate of electrical completion, certificate of occupancy by local authority having jurisdiction, which would apply to community colleges. And then the installer's fire alarm system record of completion and certification, and it's required by NFPA 72. And then the installer's sprinkler system record of material and test reports, the designer's inspection to ensure life safety, construction involving fire protection system, which would be fire alarm sprinklers, the egress, fire-rated walls, egress travel distances are constructed in accordance with contract documents. If there were elevators, boiler and pressure vessels, fire damper operation, laboratory hood certification, test and balance, battery-powered emergency devices, emergency generator load test, electrical service ground test, backflow preventer certification, stair ramp survey, engineer's approval of site survey for Diener. So not everything is going to apply, but this is the comprehensive list that you want to be sure that they go through this. The metal building manufacturer warranty, roofer's manufacturer warranty, commissioning engineer's approval, lighting protection, special inspector's final report, fuel tank inspection by Department of Agriculture, owner's assumption of responsibility for maintenance, heat, utilities, and insurance comments, established date for guarantees and warranties, cancellation of contractors, insurance carriers, public liability, property damage, and builder's risk. So these are the documents and the dates that are going to be put in place that your warranties are going to start. So that's pretty important information. Then there's the designer's approval and SEO approval. Questions about the final inspection for owner occupancy? And then the partial utilization for beneficial occupancy looks pretty much the same, but it just speaks to the beneficial occupancy. And all of this information can be found in the construction manual under section 715 for project closeout and record documents. The next tab over is claim verification, and there's more information in the construction manual under section 711 for construction claims. And this one says, were there any verified claims against this project based on Article 20 of the general conditions? It's a yes or no question. Click yes, it adds a couple of other fields there, and it wants to know, have the verified claims been resolved? And if it has, then you want to upload that settlement agreement. For each resolved claim, there could be more than one. The third tab over is construction closeout. This can also be found in section 715 of the construction manual, and this is section D, approval of final project closeout documents. So we have the final pay application. There is no template for that, but you would want to upload that document. Consent of surety of final document. Let's take a look at that one. So this one looks kind of like a court document, doesn't it? It's company to final payment, consent of surety, the contractor in accordance with the provisions of the contract between the owner and the contractor as indicated above. The surety company and the contractor hereby approves of the final payment to the contractor and agrees that the final payment to the contract shall not relieve the surety company of any of its obligations. This one has to be signed by the surety company and sealed, signed and sealed. The next one is the release of liens. I wish it didn't have all these additional clicks, but I think that's a DIT security thing. So this is pursuant to Article 36 of the general conditions of the contract, and hereby certifies that the best of his knowledge, information, and belief, the release or waivers of lien attached hereto include the contractor, all subcontractors, all suppliers of material and equipment, and all performers of work, labor, or services who have or may have liens against any property of the owner arising in any manner out of the performance of the contract referenced above. So it gets signed and sworn before a notary. And then you can see that there's a waiver of liens attached to that as well. Any questions about that one now that I've left the page? And then the contractor's affidavit of payment of debts and claims. The format is the same. It's also referencing Article 36 of the general conditions of the contract. It certifies that they have been paid in full or otherwise satisfied all obligations for all materials and equipment furnished, for all work, labor, and services performed, and for all known indebtedness and claims against the contractor for damages arising in any manner in connection with the performance of the contract referenced above. And then there's supporting documents that have to come along with this one. It's the consent of surety of final payment, contractor's release of waiver of liens, and separate release of waivers, and contractor's affidavit of release of liens. This one also gets signed and notarized. And the next one is the Appendix E MBE documentation for payment, for contract payments. And we've looked at this one before. We saw this one earlier, and it's the same, but it is part of the closeout documentation. Any questions about construction closeout on section 3? So let's look at tab 4 for certificates. So the first question is in red, and it says, was a floodplain permit required on this project? And it says yes. So if the answer is yes, then the following documents must also be provided, which are below, which is the floodplain certificate of compliance and floodplain elevation certificate. So for this one, there would be 4 documents. The first one is the certificate of compliance. Now let me go back over here. Had this been an informal project, there would have been big, bold red writing across here, and it would have said only certificate of compliance and certificate of completion are required because this is an informal project. So this one has the pertinent project information. And it's saying they certify that the work on the above referenced project has been inspected in accordance with Chapter 133, Article 1 of the General Statutes, and that the inspections of the construction, repairs, or installations have been conducted with the degree of care and professional skill and judgment ordinarily exercised by a member of our profession. And to the best of our knowledge and our professional opinion as an architect or engineer, the contractor has fulfilled the obligations of such plans, specifications, and contract. So they are signing and sealing that. And then the next one is the certificate of completion. And this one references the above project according to plans, specifications, addenda, and approved change orders. The project is now ready for owner occupancy. It gives the final inspection date, and it tells when the guarantee begins, the guarantee period, and it shall end. So this is the date that your warranties, I guess maybe the warranties are, anyway, that any guarantees are going to start on this date and end on this date. The contractors report that final payments have been made to all material suppliers, employees, and subcontractors, and copies of their lien waivers are attached. The builder's risk insurance was canceled on a specific date, and a copy of the cancellation notice is attached. The total time for completion is allowed by the contract plus granted time extension. You're going to give the total days. The actual time required for completion was, and the contractor is or is not liable, that has to be circled, for liquidated damages. The contractor has been notified of any proposed assessments or liquidated damages, and copies of each notification letter of recommendation for the amount of liquidated damages is attached. Copies of the following items are attached as indicated. So any documents that are attached would be listed here. Any written guarantees, and then their affidavits, and any unsettled disputes between the owner and contractor and owner designer, or the owner and contractor at the time of this date. And then the designer is going to sign and seal that. So that one's an important document. And both of those were together, that certificate of compliance and completion. So I don't have to double click there. So the floodplain looks a little bit different. So this one's pursuant to Section 7H, Executive Order 123, Uniform Floodplain Management Policy. The certificate of compliance for construction is hereby issued to the above subject project. And it's certified to be in compliance with the provisions of Executive Order 123. And then the architect's or engineer is going to sign and seal there. Next one, that's the big one. The floodplain elevation certificate. That takes you out to the FEMA site. I thought we had fixed that. But it is a long, formal federal document that the designer has to complete. I'm making a note that that link is still broken. But it's about 38 pages of federal information, but there's one top sheet that the designer has to complete if it's in the floodplain. So feel free to go out to the FEMA site and take a look at that. I won't spend a lot of time looking for it unless you all just particularly want to see it. If anybody wants to see it, raise your hand. Or if you want to go to the FEMA site and look at it yourself, don't raise your hand. Okay. So that's it for the certificates. And that is a designer responsibility. So they would have to upload all of that information prior to submitting under that workflow. Number 5 is the record drawings. So these are instructions of what they need to do with the record drawings. And there's a disc label and then how it's transmitted. So the contractor as-built, designer CAD, and designer sealed. So this does ask for a CD or a DVD, and this will eventually be changed in the system as well. Most times these documents can be sent in a PDF or on a flash drive if it's really big. But most of the time they can just be emailed over to our office. But the designer is going to put the date in the system here when they put that in. So once they've completed all of these sections, all 5 tabs, they can click the workflow and submit, and then it's going to come to the state construction office. There's the construction management section. We'll go through, make sure all of the documents are in order and as they should be. And then they will approve it and it can be closed. Let me go. This will pick us back up in this presentation. So this is where these documents get uploaded and it'll show the uploader. Before I do that, any questions about the tabs we just went through and what we just saw? And I've got some more screens to show you and we'll kind of expand on some stuff. Some of it we will have already covered when I did the screens for you. But the claims verification, it's showing a reference to section 506 and construction claims in the state construction manual. And we talked about that one and there's another screenshot of that. Construction closeout has the final pay application, consent of surety of final payment, the contractor's affidavit of release of liens, and the contractor's affidavit of payments of debts and claims. Appendix E, MBE documentation for contract payments. And we looked at each of those, and here are just additional screens of a walkthrough, even though I did show you all of them. To me, you can't really see them that well on this presentation, so I wanted you to see them in the system itself, but I will continue to walk through these. If you all see one you want me to slow down and show you again, just raise your hand or stop me, unmute yourself and stop me. This construction closeout document can also be found under the Help tab in Interscope. That's actually where I pulled this from, what you're looking at right now. So it's just a walkthrough for designers mostly. And now we're over on the designer certificate with the certificate of completion and compliance. And maybe I captured the FEMA. So it goes out to FEMA and it's the National Flood Insurance Program elevation certificate and instructions. So it's a PDF that they would download. Designer certificate, that's a list of the yes or no answers and what documents are out there. And then the record drawings, instructions. And once the designer's done all of that, they would submit under the workflow tab. It comes to SEO and they take a look. Now, when you do that submittal, you can see that there were some alerts that were created. So it lets folks know that there's a closeout ready to be processed. And then once SEO approves it, then there's another set of alerts letting you know that it's been completed and that the construction contracts under the package have been changed to complete. Package status automatically changes to complete as well. And it asks for confirmation, just like with the change order. Once you're submitting, it says, are you sure? So then that takes us back to it brings us back into the owner's arena. Once the designer has done their construction closeout, then the project owner can go in and close out that project. So that takes us back to that closeout project tab at the project level. And we have that little cheat matrix. So at this point, you've done all of your evaluations, you have your ratings, or hub data is finalized. You've finalized that. And you want to be sure to go back and change the status of your design contract to complete. And then all of your boxes are checked. So you're at this closeout screen and it asks you to certify that the milestone data that is entered and is complete. So once you certify that, you can close out the design and construction. Close out that design and construction, you can see that it'll give you a message at the top and it tells you that it is successful. So what that does is it takes your construction contract, your package, your design contract, and the project out of your active project search features. So in order for you to find this project in Interscope from here, you would have to search for design, construction, closeout, or just take the status out of the search criteria and put none selected, and then it'll show you everything, if that makes sense. I know that's a lot of jargon there. But the project is closed. All of the data and all of the data fields are now grayed out. It's for read only. So it locks the project down. You can't make any changes. It's complete. It's finished. So in order to, if you decided that there was money left over or that something wasn't entered and it needed to be entered, then you would have to send a problem report in through Interscope and ask me to open that project back up for you. But you'll also see under that project closeout tab that there's a financial closeout down here at the bottom, and there's money left available to commit. There's a button there for you to release those uncommitted funds. But before you do that, you want to have a conversation with your system office and make sure that they want you to release that uncommitted funds, because it could be that that money just needs to be moved from the project level back up to the program level and not release the uncommitted funds. Because if you click that button, send it all the way back up to that authorization, and that may not be where it needs to go.
Thank you, Leanne. That's exactly right. I would say if it's a project that is out of funds that are one of your auxiliaries like housing or transportation or bookstore, it is often the case that we do release those uncommitted funds as that closes the project and that money is then available for them to do something else. But it is a good idea to double check, make sure we're on the same page.
Yes. If you release those funds, it's going to send you, if you click that button, it's going to pop up a confirmation screen and ask you, are you sure you want to release excess funds? And you have to click OK for that to happen. And then the funds will be released back to the program. And then it shows there's 0 available to commit. So the project is completely finished. The money's balanced as it should be. So it's important to remember that all statuses from the contract level to the package level to the project level must be in one of the following: must be in closeout, complete, accepted, or beneficial occupancy to make the closeout happen. Any questions about project closeout? Talked about the data that's required, the statuses, and the backup documentation that we need. Okay, so we're pacing along. I'm finished with everything that I wanted to show you in the deeper dive into closeout, change order, hub entries, and authorizations and transfers. So I've got from now until 1:30 if you have questions or things that you want to dive into a little bit more or want a further explanation, or just something that I didn't cover in the last two classes that you want to know. The floor is
Leanne,
open. Yes.
I'd like to just support your discussion of closeout and kind of remind people you've been trying to do some cleanup in Interscope where you close out a lot of old stuff that's hanging around. So closeout, while it may seem like it doesn't matter, it really is important. And we'd like to encourage you to, in fact, close out projects so that they don't hang around long after you've actually been occupying the project that you did. So please do make closeout a high enough priority to get things closed out when you're done and get them off the books as an active project.
That is very helpful. And it also helps with reporting. It gives a better picture of reporting. Because if we report to the legislature that, okay, you've just given us $462 million of SCIF money, but we still have 4,600 projects still left out there active because it's showing their active projects in the system, then it kind of gives a weird picture of, well, how much work we really have out there that's active work. So we do.
It does.
We do encourage you to get that closed out, and it looks like we're doing our due diligence as the construction community, that we are getting our work done that you've given us the dollars for. So we want to show an end result.
I do see a question in the chat box regarding the universities. Do the institutions close out programs? And the answer is no. The programs are closed out by the system office. So you need to do everything else to close it out. Do the evaluations for the designer and the contractor, get your as-built, get all the certifications, all the things that Leanne said that you have to do to close out. Deal with any remaining balance so that everything is buttoned up. And then when you have all of those check boxes checked and are ready to close the program out, if you will email us in the system office, we will close the programs for you.
Any other questions or anything that you want to see in the system or want to know how it works? Or I'll leave the floor open for a few minutes and let you think on it. How do we get our logo credentials? That's a good question. So let me go over here and close this box. So if you get to the Interscope logon page, whatever, if you're an agency or university or community college, you would click one of those buttons and it would open up a spreadsheet for you. And you would just fill out this information and that won't show up in your, those little question marks or exclamation points won't show up in yours, but you would fill out that logon request and email it to interscope@doa.nc.gov. And we'll get you set up. Okay, I have a comment in the chat box. If others are interested and you have time, I'd love to build out a project. Okay, so we can do that. That won't take but just a few minutes. I'd be happy to do that. So I'm going to give a few more minutes or a few more seconds for questions. And if we don't have any more, then we can we'll do one. We'll build a project out. Okay, so I have another question asking if there'll be additional Interscope trainings offered this week. There were coworkers that wanted to sign up. Okay, we had a lot of interest in this introduction to Interscope. So if you go over to the Help tab under User Training, there's a 2024 training calendar. And these are the trainings. So the next one will be in September. And I don't know that I haven't set it up yet for you to be able to sign up, but I will do that. It'll be a sign up just like the other. one was for the introduction.
And I will
Not showing
say,
any of them.
if you're at the university and you need some help, if you will call me, I will help bridge for folks that maybe couldn't get into training, and we'll walk through things if you need to walk through them. So we'll get you through.
And also under the help tab under user training, there are vignettes for almost every task that you would do inside of Interscope, and it's a screen by screen, and it'll walk you through. Like here's one for projects. And if you go all the way up to the top, it'll walk you through entering a project, of how to create a project, and it'll give you step-by-step and screen-by-screen instructions. And the trainings that we did this month, like last week and today, were recorded, and I'm giving them to our communications office, and they're going to help me set it up in a YouTube video or some kind of video format where you can click on the different sections of training and it will take you to that training material and give you the video so you can go back through the training. But I know that it will take a couple of weeks, I think he said, to pull all that together. So that is coming. So that is part of the reason why we have a abbreviated training calendar this year as opposed to last year's. In previous years, I had done anywhere from 17 to 18 trainings per year. And you can see this year that it's, I think there's only 2, 4, 6, 7, and we'll have one more. Well, that was the state construction conference. So yeah, there's 6, and then we'll add a CPC training, which I think will be in June. I'm trying to coordinate everybody's dates to set that. So as soon as that's available, I'll add this to this construction training date calendar as well. So check back, maybe in a couple of weeks, I should have it on there, and you can go ahead and sign up for that CPC training too.